Hello and welcome to all our viewers in Nigeria to Business Point. We're live in the nation's capital, Abuja. And of course, on Business Point, we x-ray Nigeria's economy, talk about government policies, tech, and innovation. I am Queen Agaba, and I'm not alone in the studio. I have with me Uyi Agbomofwepe, my colleague.
Yeah,
It's a
Queen.
pleasure to have you in the
Yeah,
studio.
sure. I was going to. I mean, you took that off my mouth. I should say thank you for having me on the show.
Yes,
Right.
it's an absolute delight
Mhm.
for having you on the program today.
Right.
A whole lot has been happening. Talk about automobile policy. Talk about the increase in electricity tariff, and just so much fuel price, dollar rate, and all of that. What has stood out most for you, as regards all of these happenings?
I think some people will say, even though some persons think this high sounding, it's a potpourri of all the issues you have highlighted, right? Which means all of them have their very significant place in our economy, in our national life. So you can't take away the fact that, for example, the forex exchange regime. All right, the FX regime has also impacted us, businesses of all sizes, right? Our national economy and so on and so forth. Of course, add to that the long-standing, ongoing, ever-evolving impacts of the removal of fuel subsidy, all right? And now, just yesterday, news came through about the proposed increase of well over 200%, all right, of by the NERC approving that DISCOs, the distribution companies, can now do an upward review of electricity tariff. Something that currently stands at 66 naira per kilowatt, now going to be well over 200. All right, that's a whole lot. In fact, to start with, you're struggling the entire time to wrap your head around the idea behind that sort of thing. But again, let's not forget, it didn't start just this week. It's something that had happened before. In 2021, there was also the move to attempt this, and then they said, well, it was just some sort of trial. Let's poach consumers a little, Nigerians, of course, by extension, and see what the reaction will be. I think a year or so after that, it was again another attempt, and today we're seeing a lot of specific as to how this will be, all the way from 66 naira per kilowatt to over 200. So that's a lot of increase. But in all, we're looking at, for the most part, the short, medium, and long-term adverse impacts of this sort of hike on businesses.
That will bring me to asking, already Nigerians are reacting to this electricity tariff.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when I opened my phone this morning, I stumbled on someone's WhatsApp status, and it was the electricity tariff, and the rant about the increase. We're not new to increases, especially when it comes to electricity tariff.
To essentials.
Exactly. But now you'd agree with me that this is the increase is on a high, and that much percentage. What are the broader implications for Nigerians?
It's quite a whole lot, and I'll tell you why. You see, we have even added salt to injury now in the manner I was speaking, because, like I mentioned at the top of this show, Nigerians are still trying to wrap their heads around the adverse implications of the suspension, as some people refer to it, I mean, some economists do call it, of the payment of fuel subsidy, because we have not survived that just yet. We know how that's actually led to the increase in prices of food items and all of that. So when you talk about, when it eventually, and we hope it doesn't happen, if it eventually comes to fruition, if it's eventually implemented, it will have a lot of implications. Because as of today, manufacturers, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, as an entity, is already complaining. It's already lamenting, already saying, look, this will just, businesses are already suffering. A lot of them are standing on one leg for those that can still stand at all. But when this is floated, this idea of increase in electricity tariff, it means you're just going to bury practically bury businesses. And when that happens, we know what it means. Because we also have not forgotten in the hurricane the number of companies that have had to either leave Nigeria altogether for, this being one of the major reasons, and then those who had to scale down very significantly their operations because of issues around infrastructure deficit, insecurity, and epileptic power system that we operate in this country. But let's not also forget, they say there's no smoke without fire. a lot of development economists now will tell you for free that this is also what they're saying at the hands of the multilateral institutions, IMF and the World Bank. Because if you remember also a few years ago, we also had this back and forth, time and again, several conversations around the tax regime in the country, particularly with reference to VAT, that's value added tax. All right, the IMF in particular say, look, you have to jack up your tax. At some point, they were recommending 50% VAT. Later, they said, okay, you have to do 10% VAT. But you see, all of these also are pointed to where we are as a country. They say you can't have your cake and eat it, right? For Nigeria, we keep borrowing, and your lender has to give you preconditions or give you conditions as to whether or not they can borrow to you. And where you are not able to also meet up with the terms of previous borrowings, now you're asking for some sort of concession, you're asking to be cut some slack and all of that. They also give you conditions again. For example, we have seen that happen with the Forex exchange rates. At a point, if you remember, in this country, until when the current president came on board, we had several exchange rates. We had a rate for those who import crude oil. We had rate for those who go to Asia, particularly China, to import raw materials. All right. We had a rate for those who were paying tuition abroad, and so on and so forth. So, at a point, even the former CBN governor, His Royal Highness Emir, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, had said, look, you can't run a country like this, where you have this sort of regimented foreign exchange system, all right? And then, but again, like I said, when President Bola Tinubu took over at the helms, one of the first things he did was to say, let's merge the foreign exchange windows and all of that. So now we have that taken care of. But the damage that had been done over time are yet to be addressed in full, even though we understand every other day government is inundating us with news stories as to efforts being made to ensure that all of these issues are tackled as quickly as possible. So to cycle back to your question in particular, yes, it has a lot of implications for businesses, because don't forget, they say when two elephants fight, in this case, by the way, I'm sure this is a case of more than two elephants, the ground will suffer. In this case, what it means is if we were to adopt, or if Nigerians were eventually to pay this new rate that we're hearing of, all right, by the discos, it simply means businesses that will survive are left with no choice naturally than to ultimately push the impact of it, the brunt, as they call it, to end users of their services and those who use their products.
Absolutely. Now, so can we just look at the reasons why, there was an increase in this electricity tariff, the considerations, why did all of this, and, what ways could we have put in place? How are we getting it wrong to, mitigate, these effects that we've just talked about, this effect of this electricity tariff?
It's interesting. Again, it goes down to the fact that you can't have, and there's something called cause and effects. So you commit an error, and then there's consequence for it, right? We have made mistakes a lot with the O&G, the oil and gas sector over time. Now we understand the price of gas has also skyrocketed. And don't forget, Queen, you can't talk about power generation, because that's where it starts from, because there's a chain in the power sector. So you have generation, the one you call the GENCOs, you have transmission, all right, and then you have the distribution, the DISCOs, right? So you can't generate without gas, and that's why you see when we had Fashola as Minister of Power for almost 4 years at a time, he would always talk about gas, and gas again. Nigeria is a country that's, to put it mildly, is rich, like enormously rich in gas. And then you're wondering, why are we still having these sort of drawbacks with gas? Maybe that's, time will fail us to talk about that. But this particular instance of proposed increase in tariff is occasioned by what experts now say is a significant, if you like, increase in the price of gas, because the power distribution people, the generation people have to go get gas to be able to generate. Now, because there's a differential in the price, they have to reflect that in how they sell to the transmission guys. Transmission has to reflect it in how they sell to the distribution guys. The distribution guys have to reflect that in how they sell to you and I. So it's a chain effect we're having right now. So it's like me going to Onitsha from Abuja, for example. I say I go to Onitsha main market, for instance. I buy a particular product, let's say even fabrics and maybe items of clothing generally. You don't expect that if I bought an item, for example, at 4,000, say sometime in July last year or even September, and then I bring to Abuja, I say, okay, all factors considered, I'm going to sell for 6,100, for example. Now, fast forward to when that item at Onitsha market now sells for, let's say, 5,900. I can't sell at that same price anymore because of other factors, ancillary costs that are involved in it. So gas, or the price of gas, is the major reason why we are where we are. But don't forget, I also said a while ago that this apparently isn't the first time that this issue of increase or proposed increase in tariff as far as electricity is concerned in Nigeria has been muted. But this appears to be one that looks a bit more serious. But then the Senate says, look, we are going to wade into this. My colleagues were on the show this morning, Joma and Anthony, and I think Anthony was asking the guests, of what importance will that be? What difference will it make? Is it not even, I mean, this is me talking now. Isn't it even possible that was nothing better than a political rhetoric? Because when you say want to wade into it, what's the intention behind that intervention in the first instance? What is the goal? What do you want to achieve with that? Because will your intervention even impact that conversation? Because first of all, we're talking Naira and Kobo here, all right? So on what level are you going to intervene in such a way that everybody will leave the table happy? Everybody now will mean the stakeholders in the power sector and ultimately the consumers.
Definitely, like you said, there are going to be challenges.
Right.
Like following this increase. And then we know that following Nigeria's economy and how much pressure is going to be put following the increase in electricity tariff. I'm wondering, because I'm always out for the way that we can see, if you were in, I'm going to ask you this question, like you were in position of government, what can the government do to see to it that this tariff, there's already so much pressure on Nigeria's economy.
Right.
And now the increase in prices of gas and electricity, I know is going to put far more pressure on the economy. But what can we do? What can the government do to ensure that, there's not much pressure coming from this increase? And that we do not even exacerbate the current economic
already very, very challenging situation
that we are facing. So what's the way out, literally? Or is there no way out? Are we going to continue to talk? Because what we see is this is not the first time there's an increase in electricity tariff, and we were promised that, it's just a phase and things are going to be in order to ensure that. But how long? For how long are we going to continue like this, and what's the way forward?
You see, first of all, let's talk about leadership for a minute. Government is put in place to think. That's a problem. In my former organization, I have a guest, an economist, a very fiercely brilliant one. He would always ask, who is thinking for Nigeria? You see, it may look like a pedestrian question, but that question at the least is very fundamental. Who is thinking for Nigeria? We're not asking who is thinking about the next election and how he's going to win. We're talking about who is thinking economics for Nigeria, who is thinking social development for Nigeria, who is thinking infrastructure development, who is thinking upscaling the healthcare system in Nigeria, who is thinking about bringing revolution to education in Nigeria, whether it is STEM or whatever it is, policy, drastic policy changes in Nigeria. So in this regard, concerning your question, who is thinking for the power sector? People are already saying, this morning, for example, an economist was saying on the program, of course, you can say that's subjective because that's his personal opinion, about how that there's so much of incompetence and ineptitude in the power sector, all right? For instance, how much of leadership is the minister providing for the sector? We've got to think about that. Don't forget, like other ministries, the Ministry of Power has agencies under it. How much do those agencies galvanize support amongst themselves? How much do they rally around the mother in the sector? In this case, I use my words carefully here, the ministry itself, Ministry of Power, right? How much support do they get? Do the agencies even understand their mandate in the first instance, or they just think about power, revenue generation? Do they even understand the issue of infrastructure? For example, I hosted a powerful cost program on radio for over a year, some time ago, a few years ago. I realized that most times you bring the public relations officer of a disco, of a distribution company to your program, right? He's telling you one of the issues they're dealing with is the fact that they don't even have infrastructure to transmit power. He says that's one of the several issues that the transmission end of the markets is dealing with. The infrastructure to transmit power is broken in Nigeria, first of all. So it's pretty much like you have a stream right behind your house. I mean, in your backyard, you have a stream. In fact, it is spring, clean enough to drink straight up, I mean, from the cascade. But you don't have a means of piping it into your house, into your apartment. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it means you have one of two problems. You either can't get water into the house anyhow, or you have to go through so much of rigorous process to be able to get water in. So that's where we are. The question is, what has changed in the last 30 years about our power sector? Not so much, beyond the fact that there's been a change in nomenclature. So 1 minute is ECN, the next is NEPA, the next is PHCN, and then you break it down to different discos. Now today we have 11. You just mentioned one, AADC for example, you have BDC, you have JPEDC, and so on and so forth. But you see, beyond nomenclature, the question is how vibrant, how robust, how effective are they? The discos themselves are already complaining. In fact, for some years, they've been complaining about what they call paucity of funding and so on and so forth. They had to take loans in the first instance to even float upon the completion of the privatization that produced all 11 discos. Has that changed? Has that improved? All right, you have had to take loans again and again. I mean, all the discos, all 11 of them. At the point, it was so bad that there was even a face-off between Edo State Governor Godwin Obaseki and the MD of BEDC, that was the Benin Electricity Distribution Company. In recent times, we're seeing people now calling, in fact, Nigerians calling for the revocation of licenses that had been issued to the discos, all 11 of them. But the question is, would that even answer the question that we're asking? Now, backtrack a little to several years ago, when we had Chief Olusegun Obasanjo as president. $16 billion had been pumped into the power sector in the name of integrated power projects. I mean, NIPP, Nigeria Integrated Power Projects. That was, I mean, Obasanjo left office, what, some 17 or so years ago. Yet, Nigerians continue to wail and wallow as far as electricity distribution is concerned. So the question is there a way out? That's what you asked. Exactly. Yes, there's a way out. So first off, we go back to where we started from. Government has got to put on its thinking cap. Government must think. If government can't think top to bottom, federal, state, or local, then that government has lost legitimacy, because you must be thinking on your feet. You must be innovative. There will always be problems in the world. Nigeria will always have problems. America will always have problems. All the countries in the world will always have problems. The difference, however, is the sincerity of purpose. It is the will, power. It is the political will. It is the courage, and it is the vision. Where do you want to take our power sector to? Because that's the problem. Remember, before Fashola, former Minister of Power, came into office, he had said any responsible and serious government won't need more than 6 months to fix power. But he came into office and he was there for what? 3.5 years. We didn't fix power. If anything, we retrogressed. As of today, to talk about specifics, Nigeria has not been able to record more than 4,500 to 5,000 megawatts of. I mean, when that even happens, we're celebrating as if it's Christmas and Ramadan combined, all right? Because, I mean, that's just how mediocre we've been with our power output, with our power distribution system in this country. Whereas you see other countries like Egypt, where you have less than half the population of Nigeria, I mean, nothing more than 100 million people, boasting of at least 20,000 megawatts. Now, you need to go back to 2010 when South Africa was going to host the World Cup and see how much capacity they added to their grid just because they wanted to host the World Cup within that short period. You're asking yourself, between 2010, when the World Cup ended in South Africa, and today, 14 years down the line, what have we added? Today is 4,000. At some point, they tell you the grids have collapsed. It's nationwide blackouts. President is delivering a speech, there's power outage. You see, if you do the wrong thing long enough, it will become normal. Right?
Absolutely. And you know, it makes me begin to wonder what alternatives were considered before, you know, these increase in tariffs were implemented, just like you rightly said. But we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at other pivotal matters as regards national concerns. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Many thanks for staying with us. Now, if you've just joined us, this is Business Point on Global Television, where we talk about government policies, economic matters, and tech, as well as innovation. And before the break, my colleague Abomofwebe has just established, some of the concerns as regards the increase in electricity tariff. Now, away from the tariff, I want us to look at the Nigeria's national, automobile policy.
Policy, right?
Yeah. We've had this policy. This is not the first. In fact, it was the NADDC before it was later, rebranded to the NIPC.
Right.
I want to see what progress has been made. At the time, it was said that last year, 2023, that we're looking to producing over 200,000 local vehicles, and all that increased job creation for a lot of young people. And so far, this is 2024. I know that we've been hearing. It was criticized at some point last year that we've been having talks and talks and talks, about our own automobile policies and all that. But what has changed from 2023 to now? This is a year now, almost a year, 11 months. What has changed?
Queen, this conversation is a bit protracted, and I'll tell you why. You can't talk about policies without politics. In fact, one word comes from the other, right? Policies come from politics, right? Now, that said, the point being made is a former governor in the South once said that if a governor, for example, has personal interests in a project, that project will never be abandoned. What that means is most times when these policies are rolled out or formulated, they are done absent-mindedly. However, it doesn't discount in any way the fact that we have had some think tanks that came together, formulated very visionary and revolutionary policies, whether it's in automobile, in tech, in oil and gas, in education, health, and so on and so forth. But the question is the government of the time, not just this government, per time, is the government responsible enough? Is the government responsible enough? Does the government even think global? Because there's always a global direction for anything you're doing. Education is an example. Now, we talk about education, just to deviate for a second. You're talking about STEM, science, tech, engineering, and math. Nigeria is not having that conversation, even though we pretend that we are. We're not having that conversation. In fact, the reason we seem to even be aware of it a little is on account of the work that's being done by the private sector, smart young people in tech ecosystems across this country. But as said, the point being made here is that policy you talked about, amongst other things, was aimed at driving indigenization of automobile manufacturing, right? The second was to scale employment opportunities for the TIMI graduates in this country. At the time we started really getting vehement, at the turn of the 21st century, about conversations around automobile policy was when we had former President Goodluck Jonathan in office, and people were saying, look, this is the best time. We have a young man, dynamic, with a lot of blood, fresh blood in his veins, whatever that means. And somebody with a PhD, for example, not honorary, one he studied for and all that. This will be the time to throw our weight as a country behind indigenous ideas as far as automobile manufacturing is concerned. But the irony of it all, and sadly so, was that it happened, that was the time you started seeing influx of foreign brands of automobile coming into the country. Let's be clear, you can't be in the US, whether you are a citizen, you are just a waka pass, or you're there studying, and you're not talking Ford, you're not talking Chevrolet, because those are indigenous brands. In Nigeria, what are our brands? If you go to Asia, go to Korea, for example, you are talking Hyundai, you're talking Kia. In Nigeria, what are our brands in Nigeria? We're even saying, let's drive our brands and adopt locally first. Let's be using it. Let Queen buy it, let Uyi buy it, let state governments buy it. No, they won't do that. State governments across this country till tomorrow, apart from maybe a state like Anambra, as far as we know, on record, still continue to buy vehicles from Europe, America, and Asia. Because some people say, well, that gives them that latitude to be able to fleece public funds, taxpayers' money. Because they know if they do it locally, it may be a bit difficult. So what do some of these governors do? They order on paper, say 120 units of a particular model of vehicle, and then they eventually cancel and say, no, let's cut it down from 120 that we had earlier ordered to, say, 65, right? So they get a refund for the other 55. and redirect, as we say, about the internet to some other account somewhere, maybe in Swiss, maybe in the US, maybe in the UK. But the records in that government house 20, 30 years down the line will show you that it was 120 vehicles that were ordered. And you do your audit and you realize that it was actually 65 vehicles they got, even though you cannot even account for all 65. Now, what's the point of all of this? The point is there's absence of patriotism. You see, policies are not just talk shops where you come, you talk, you drink water, you eat chicken and rice, you stay in 5-star hotels and you go home. No. Policies must well up from a place of patriotism. There must be that need that you have seen in society that you want to feel, whether it's in our Greek, whether it's in education or health. So in the case of automobile policy, at least we have, give or take, one name that has some fair prominence in terms of, the industry. The question is, how much of support have we given to that particular manufacturer? If anything, what we have even done is to give them more problem than support them. What is wrong? Again, this goes back to patriotism. What is wrong if we were to formulate a policy that says, at the worst, every state government is mandated by law, because there must be a piece of legislation to that effect, that says that as a state government, you can't have less than 65 or even 70% local vehicles. We don't care if you buy 30 or 35% from Europe, Asia, or America, but 65, 70% of the vehicles that each state government uses or purchases must be locally sourced. For the federal government, you can even say 80%, because we have ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government. Go and check their vehicles today. The brands is a plethora of brands that they have. Almost none of them is Nigerian. The only time we heard about, okay, let's patronize Nigeria, and there was actually practical action in that direction, was when you had Peter Obi as governor of Anambra State. And we understand that the current governor, former CBN governor as well, Professor Charles Chukwuma Soludo, has told that path. But the question is, will the governor after Professor Soludo continue that trajectory? Are other state governments taking a cue from that? And some of these state governments, funny enough, the state governors themselves, I should say, come from a core private sector background. So they are supposed to even understand these dynamics better than the core conventional politician. But then again, when you're not patriotic, there's next to nothing we can do about it.
So we have brands like saying we have brands like Nord, particularly. But like you said, there's just one brand that we know is out there, and we're not doing so much of patronage and,
right.
Yes, for that particular brand. Now, these policies, it makes me want to wonder, what exactly, why can't we have policies that would make us patronize these brands? But like you mentioned, you said, these people, sometimes because of fraudulent activities in government.
Underhand dealings.
Yes, handlings. You said.
Underhand dealings.
Underhand dealings.
Right.
Underhand dealings, particularly, one of the reasons why we can patronize this branch. So
right.
Moving forward, I like to take the stand of you are in government. One of the things you would do is ensure that there are policies formulated to patronize local brands, particularly. So what else can we do? How do we begin? Can we now begin to look at these brands by themselves advertise? I've seen a couple of adverts for a particular brand. Safe to say, Innocent. But I'm aware of 2 other brands. I can't remember the last name right now, but Nords and the rest. So when we talk about these brands, should we put out more advert? Talk about, how do we now begin to project these brands, make it enticing, for people to look into patronizing Nigerians and locally made cars?
I'll tell you what it is. You see, I'm from Edo State, proudly so, right? So in Benin, there's what we call Okpolo Eye. Okpolo Eye is greed. It's a street word for greed, right? So it means you lack contentment. So if you say somebody has Okpolo Eye, it means they are bereft of contentment. They always are greedy to get more, even, against all odds, even if it means violating their personal principles and values and all that. I'll tell you what it is. There was a time when I was growing up. If you wanted to say something was substandard, you would say it was Taiwan. You would say it was Chinese, right? Or it was from Taiwan or from China and all that. But today that has changed very drastically. As a matter of fact, most of the smartphones we use are either manufactured in whole in China or assembled in China, including our iPhones and iPads and iPods and all of that. What's the point here? The point here is we must realize that everything has a face. if we get serious today, it doesn't mean by tomorrow morning when we all wake up, it will be Uhuru. No. What it means is we must first be clear where we want to go to. Even if it's a 40-year plan we're pursuing, you've got to start from somewhere. And I'll give you a quick example. If we say, for instance, we want to drive this issue around adopting indigenous technology when it comes to automobile, yes, you've talked about advertising and so on and so forth. It's brilliant, but it's not far-reaching enough. There must be adoption before you say, let's go and advertise. Who are you advertising to? People are not even thinking of the brand. I mean, the government does not, from all actions, does not seem to even believe in these brands. You see, there must be legislation that mandates some of these things. There must be a system, a structure that creates some sort of, if you like, restriction as to what governments at all levels can do in this regard. For instance, like I said a while ago, if you had a legislation that says a state government or a state governor, in fact, a state governor cannot drive a non-Nigerian brand of vehicle for the entire time he's in office, so that's for 4 years or for 8 years, it stands. It's a no, it stands. But what we always do is we expect these politicians to just use their mind, to just use their godly mind. It doesn't work like that. You see, the law is made for the lawless. Human beings by nature are lawless. More so, people who have not been accustomed to living, in ways that align with the law. So the point is, first, create legislation, and then lead by example. You can't be a state governor or president. You're telling me to buy indigenous items, but every time I see you, your shoe is from it's from Italy, your suit is from France, and then what else? The watches you're wearing, you bought them from a store in London. Nothing is Nigerian about you, so apart from maybe your name at best. So even your international passports are printed by foreign companies. So it means that we have not told ourselves the truth. Again, that's why when we talk about sincerity of purpose, it's not just a pedestrian conversation. It has a deep root. So we must have to fix that. Because until we do that, there's going to always be a problem. Let's also be clear. When you say you have policy in place, it is not the president all by himself that implements the policy. Because at most, in 8 years, in the case of Nigeria, the president is out of office. That applies to the governor as well. However, the bulk of these policies are governized, implemented, evaluated, and monitored by core career civil servants. So that brings you to the question of where exactly are we with regards to the state of our civil service? When government introduces a policy, for example, now the student loan law, how many civil servants, even the most senior of them, the directors, the assistant directors, the permanent secretaries, understand and believe in this law? Yes, the president signed it the other day. We saw Senate President, we saw House of Reps Speaker, Chief of Staff, all of them around him. Everybody's excited. But are the civil servants themselves even in tandem with the goal, with the overall objective of the government? So if you introduce an automobile-specific policy today, how many civil servants, even those who say they are in Ministry of Technology, they are in Ministry of Science, understand what the government is doing? Because two cannot work except they agree. So if the federal government, the executive says we are heading in this direction, and the civil servants who are supposed to drive it from the longer term are either not in agreement, are not interested, or they're just simply ignorant, then it means it takes you back to where you are. You're not going to make progress. It means that we must be deliberate about this policy, because you are asking, if I were in government, what would I do? It's not a one-man show. It's something that requires collective, concerted efforts. So in this case, the president must be able to galvanize ministries, departments, and agencies. But that would be much easier to do if you have a law in that direction. But let's also be clear. If you took a law, if you took a bill to the National Assembly, and you say, amongst other elements, this bill seeks to ensure that no president or governor will drive a foreign-made brand of vehicle for as long as they're in office. There was a time, a group of women had visited the House of Representatives. Speaker then was Dimeji Bankole. And one of the things they did propose to him was, look, we want a situation where the wives of elected officers in this country, particularly at the federal level, their wives, their children are not able to seek, they are restricted from seeking health care abroad or healthcare services. They are restricted from traveling abroad for studies. The speaker told them straight up in their face, not after that day, in their face, straight there, in his office, that look, all of these things you guys have outlined here, they make sense. In fact, I will, by the grace of God, with the assistance of my colleagues, ensure that we pursue all of those things. However, this one around restricts public officers and elected officers and their families from traveling abroad for health care reasons, for study reasons, will not work. It was very clear. But even if the former speaker, Dimeji Bankole, had not said that, is it not clear from the body language and so on and so forth? You see, when your interest is involved in something, you will pay attention. A state governor in the South built some people say it's a world-class university. It depends on how you're assessing it and who is assessing it. Within 4 years, from scratch, it was not an existing university that was refurbished or renovated. It was built in the bush from scratch. Police barracks, roads tarred end to end. Why? His personal interest was involved in it. So if you bring that attitude, if you replicate it across board, whether it's in automobile policy, health, education, infrastructure, whatever it is, you will get the same exact results. In computer science, they call it garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely. And then I think, like you rightly said, if your interest is involved, you would do excellently well, and you would do it with passion,
right,
as regards interest. I think that what you have rightly said here is pivotal and clearly articulated. Your concerns have been clearly articulated. But I think that as regards support also, don't you think these local brands should be giving some sort of incentives, and there should be like a support scheme to enable local manufacturers, assemblers, and all of that to be able to better. My question here is, why don't we patronize these brands? I begin to look at, is it that these brands are not trusted enough? Do we think that Nigerian-made brands, they don't have all it takes, to assemble a whole car? There are challenges. Obviously, they have challenges like some materials, some supplies. I learned that for Innocent Vehicles, when in an interview with him, he said, most of the things here are Nigerian-made. Most of the parts,
the components,
about 70% of the components of the
are locally sourced.
Locally sourced, actually, and then 30% are imported. So we'll see that we have the market here, but what could be the limiting factors? It makes me want to ask: are they not supported enough? Why don't we hear of other brands? There are a few other brands coming up that make cars, car manufacturers, that we don't hear that much as we hear the very first manufacturer that I've just mentioned. So as regards incentives, do you think that's a way to go, support schemes for these brands?
It is. You see, when you say support, it's a bit ambiguous, because in the final analysis, what you find is the peculiarity of Nigeria. So when you talk about supporting these brands, in the case of Nigeria, apparently because of the unique nature of our economy, of our country, you can't compare that with when you're talking about support for the same industry in Mexico, in Canada, in the US, or even somewhere in Europe or Asia. Now, that said, give them all the support they want. You have been giving support to people in other sectors. We know how much. There's probably no group or no conglomerate in this country that has enjoyed as much support as the Dangote Group, especially as it has to do with cement in particular. Cement, yes, you may say, well, cement is directly, has direct correlation with shelter. But you see, people have to also be mobile. They have to also be able to move from place to place to speed up productivity, scale up productivity, and all that. Now, what does that mean? In terms of support, give them tax breaks. Make the ease of business elements simpler. We know, yes, it has been simplified in the last couple of years, 7, 8 years, especially with the leadership provided by former President Muhammadu Buhari and his vice, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, who particularly was heading the economic team at the time. We saw that the ease of business factor had improved very tremendously. However, they say the biggest room in the world is the one for improvement. So continue to improve ease of doing business, which means if a company says, look, we want to float a factory, want to go into automobile manufacturing, don't make their lives miserable before they even step their foot in the door. All right? If anything, make the process simpler for them than you had done for others in the past. That's number one. Now, by the time they float, give them tax break. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, because the automobile industry is not instant noodles. It's not 2 minutes instant passports where you just snap fingers and the revenue is turning in, you are breaking even, you are becoming profitable. No, give them tax breaks, maybe between 5 and 10 years. That's one way you support them. Where they need instruments, they need loans, for example, also make that process very easy for them. Of course, that should cut across the entire manufacturing space, not just for automobile alone, all right? What else can you do for them? Government can give them some sort of subtle endorsement. If I go to the federal secretariats on a weekday, today is Friday, in the nation's capital, so it may be a different conversation, but on a typical Monday or Tuesday morning, between say 9 and 11 o'clock, if I go to the federal secretariat in Abuja here, what are the most common brands of vehicles I'll find? Of course, you and I know the answer. Do it across all the 36 states in this country, it is pretty much the same thing, which means you are demarketing directly or indirectly the local brands in the industry. So government can do what I want to call subtle endorsements by saying, look, MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies must buy a certain percentage, minimum percentage of local vehicles. So I come to a ministry of X, ministry of Y, ministry of Z, and I'm saying these local brands replicated across these different government agencies. And you see even private organizations patronizing them as well. It gives you this sense of, okay, this is the direction, we have to key into it. Yes, of course, there always be those initial hiccups. It's natural with everything else, even in education. When you get into university for the first time, at some point, for the most part, you are disoriented because this is not something you're used to, particularly that first semester. But by the time you're done your first year, you get to second year, you become like an advisor to the people who are coming into the first year because of the experience you would have garnered during your 100-level period, right? It is the same thing. We're going to have those challenges. So let us be very clear. When GSM was introduced into this country in 2001, people complained. If they were not complaining about the price of top-up, recharge cards, as we then knew it, the vouchers, they would complain about poor service. Of course, more than 2 decades down the line, we are still complaining about poor service. Somebody could not get to me this morning. It was a struggle because of poor service. But the question is, have we improved or not? Of course we have. There was a time in this country, the least recharge card you could buy was 500. Later, the least, as of 2005, the least recharge card in this country was 400. The records are there. But today, people can buy as small as 100. People can buy as small as even 50 naira on their phone. So it means that we must have our eye on the ball. We must enjoy and believe in the process. The government must provide all the needed support. There are countries that have done it before. There's nothing you want to accomplish in this life as an individual or even a government or a country that someone else somewhere has not done before. All you have to do is look at their model, tweak it to the uniqueness of your situation, roll it outside. The rest is history. Nothing is rocket science, ultimately.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have one more coming on.
It's always a delight.
And speaking on the state of Nigeria's economy, the state of the nation, it's a delight having you. Absolutely.
Same.
All right. We'll take a quick break now, and when we return, we'll take a look at the highlights in the world of business. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. In business, the Naira continued its gain against the United States dollars, appreciating both at the official foreign exchange and parallel markets to the delight of many Nigerians. At the Nigerian Autonomous Foreign Exchange markets, the Naira gained 16 or 1.26% as the dollar was quoted at 1,262.85 Naira per dollar, stronger than 1,278.58 Naira. Data from the FMDQ Securities Exchange indicated. This means the local currency has steady dollar supply, pushes Naira to 1,262 Naira per dollar, continued its positive streak against the green with expectations of further appreciation. The appreciation of the local currency was attributed to the several foreign exchange policies implemented by the Central Bank of Nigeria to boost dollar supply and enhance transparency in the FX market. And this is where we call it a day on Business Point, but I'll leave you with this report from Kike Lomo Okere. I'm Queen Agabado. Have a nice day ahead.
Hello and welcome to Business Report on Global Morning. According to data from Debt Management Office, The total public debt in Nigeria is an estimated 97.34 trillion naira, that is $108.23 billion as of December 2023. This figure was an increase of 146% from 39.56 trillion naira, that is $95.77 billion as at the end of the previous year. The major reason for the significant increase in the addition of CBN 20 trillion naira, that is $48 billion, in ways and means, leading to the government and about 60% devaluation of naira. The federal and the state governments owe a combination of domestic and foreign debt. Domestic debt is made up of FGN, security, treasury bill, and more recently CBN ways and means on the foreign scene. Amid economic challenges, the Nigerian stock market has showcased resilience, experiencing significant growth in the first quarter of 2024, starting the year at 74,774.73 points. The NGX surged by 39.84%, representing 87% of the total growth achieved in 2023. Market capitalization also surged, increasing by 18.2 trillion naira to close at 59.13 trillion naira in the first quarter of 2024. The exceptional performance of the market was driven by the exceptional performance of an individual stock, among them the cement companies. The three listed cement companies, Boa Cement, Dangote Cement, and Lafarge, total market capitalization moved up to 17.164 trillion naira in the first quarter of 2024. Ghana Cocoa Marketing Board, Cocoa Board, is set to raise the price paid to cocoa farmers for their produce by 50% to share extra profit from rising global prices. A spokesperson from Cocoa Board relayed the information. Accordingly, cocoa prices have more than tripled in the last year due to adverse weather and disease affecting the output of cocoa farmers, pushing the global market to a third successive deficit. Before this announcement, the official price cocoa grower in Ghana and Ivory Coast, who supply about 60% of the world cocoa produce, can charge for their produce, was yet to reflect the current price surge in the global market. Kike Lomo Ukeri, Global Television News.